The Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison, speaking to you from a dorm room at Indiana University with much to discuss this morning. And for the second episode in a row, you'll notice that my head and the space behind it is taking up about half the space as it normally does. And that's because this time we have Andrew Hillsman here to join us. So, Andrew, I'll let you kind of take the floor and tell the people who you are and what you do within IU Sports Media.
Hey, Andrew. Well, it's a blast to be on here. You know, we're discussing a relatively fun topic, I would say today. You know, it is probably the greatest time we've ever seen in Indiana sports. But yeah, I'm Andrew Hillsman. I'm a junior in IU Sports Media. I do WIUX radio with the host of the show, Andrew Garrison, and I do broadcasting for Indiana hockey, Big Ten Plus. Stuff here and there for the Hoosier Network and IUS TV. And then I'll be one of the two play-by-play voices for Indiana softball this spring.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, that's the spring sports are going to be fun and
they'll be
interesting
fun.
to see play out. Yeah.
They'll be interesting. After my first summer in summer baseball, I kind of have a deeper understanding of the ins and outs of college baseball, so I can watch the Indiana team with a little bit of more of a critical eye. But also, one of our players from last summer is Indiana's catcher TJ Schuyler, so I'm excited to go see him play.
Nice. Yeah, and those are coming up. I was thinking about this just yesterday, that I honestly didn't realize that those sports are starting as early as February, which is a little bit alarming because we just had the football season end about a week ago.
Well,
that's what we're here to talk about.
Exactly, and it's so weird to think like, oh, football season just ended, but Indiana was still playing in the football season. Usually, football season ends on Thanksgiving weekend for Indiana. Not this year. It has been the greatest year as an Indiana sports fan. Me personally, I was not an Indiana sports fan before coming to college. I didn't really have a college. My parents went to Michigan, Northwestern. My brother went to Purdue, so I rooted for Purdue for a little bit, but you know, had to make the heel turn, and then here I am. And I mean, I can't imagine what it's like right now to be, you know, a fan who's had season tickets for 50 years and has watched and stayed through every game to watch their team just get demolished, regardless of who they play. I mean, they were getting their butts kicked in non-conference play, and there were still fans that showed up. So that is, I guess, who I'm happiest for right now, because of just the dedication it takes to stay and support a team like that when they're just not doing well at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear you have that perspective, because I kind of have a similar one. I grew up a Purdue fan, so both my parents went to Purdue. So also grew up a Saints fan because of Drew Brees. They were in college at the same time as him, went to the Rose Bowl, had all that. But mostly, obviously, a Purdue men's basketball fan. And so it's weird, and I agree completely. Like I watched the game at Assembly Hall and then ran to Kirkwood immediately.
Yep, I did the same thing. Yeah,
I was kind of just watching looking at the people, appreciating. I was happy for them. You know what I mean? I was obviously happy myself, but definitely I feel like it faded pretty quicker than for most. Just for me, just because I obviously hadn't had that exactly what you're saying. Hadn't had that lead up, and I'm spoiled in that way, and I'm also spoiled because my parents didn't. Obviously, when you grow up, you just care about the sports your parents care about, for most people. Right. And my parents didn't care about the Pacers at all. And then as I kind of got older and became my own person, I started wanting to like the Indianapolis teams more than I had as a child. And so obviously the Pacers and the Fever come with that. And that lined up exactly with the Pacers.
They lined up pretty well for you. Yeah.
So I was spoiled there, and I even had those weird mixed emotions during the NBA Finals where I was like, I don't feel like I deserve this. Like I was a real fan then, but. Yeah, so same with IU football. But the experience in Assembly Hall, so it's nice to know that you were there as well.
Oh, my gosh.
It was awesome.
They
so
did
loud.
that. It was loud, and I was looking around, and I realized, I'm like, why is this not totally full? But they only allotted 14,000 tickets, and I think there were right around 14,000 people that showed up. So I think they did a really good job of putting that event on in a short amount of time. I mean the tickets sold out. I mean, they were free to claim. They sold out in 90 minutes. It was a very, that's about the only way to do it. I liked that they didn't charge for it. I think other schools, when they do those watch parties, I think they have charged for those in the past. But I like the way Indiana did it. I think they did a really good job, and just, the experience of being there. I thought about it, and a lot of my friends in sports media, a lot of our friends in sports media were there in Miami. I have to imagine that the experience here and the experience there are almost equal.
Yeah, certainly. And because I had a couple friends, obviously within sports media, and even just, fans, other students
Right.
that were there. And I was thinking to myself, and I even said to a friend on Kirkwood, I was like, this is the place to be. Like, obviously, if you can be at the game, you can be at the game. But I imagine that secretly in the back of the minds of some of the people that were in Miami, there's a little bit of FOMO with, Kirkwood and everything. And yeah, it was great. And certainly the place to be right here, even as someone that didn't grow up an IU fan.
Exactly. I mean, it was all positive, and just the part that I thought was the craziest was when they started lighting the furniture on fire. That was interesting. I kind of stayed away from that, just for my own personal safety. But people do weird things when towns win championships. You remember when Philadelphia won their first Super Bowl in 2018, and they had to grease the light poles all across the city. I wonder how many pounds of grease they used to stop people from climbing up those poles. I don't think they had time to do that here because there were plenty of people on poles.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as I'm aware, no one got severely hurt. So we'll take that.
No, I think everybody was good. So yeah,
completely
positive.
An innocent championship right there. So as far as the game actually goes, I was talking to you off air just a moment before we started, talking on the show about how championship games are weird. It never feels like it almost feels like such a big game that it's almost offensive to just say, this is the takeaway, this is why a team won, as you can do with many regular season games. And obviously, as a fan, it's such an emotional experience. It's hard to be analytical. But takeaways from the game. I'm curious what, from, sort of an X's and O's perspective, Indiana won this game because I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Indiana won this game, I think, because they played their brand of football, which is mistake-free. I look around at teams throughout the country and throughout the year, even in the CFP. I mean, you look at it, the prime example of that. I go back to the first-round game between Texas A&M and Miami. That was a mistake-filled game. I cannot tell you, I can't remember. Maybe the Iowa game. But even then, Iowa's defense was playing really well. They won that game by 5 points. Indiana got it done, right? You got to go back to week 1 to say definitively, okay, these are mistakes that Indiana made that actually had a bearing on the game. I mean, they didn't win that Old Dominion game by too much. That was their worst game of the year, and it came in week 1. That's a great thing. But the fact that you have to go all the way back to August 30th to find a game in which Indiana made that many quote-unquote mistakes is a testament to how well coached this team is. And, there's been hours and eons of discourse about, they're not as talented of a team. They don't have the 5 stars. It doesn't matter when you're coached that well. And Kurt Cignetti and his staff, the staff should get so much credit. I mean, Mike Shanahan, Bryant Haynes, and the position coaches as well. It is all that organizational leadership. That's what matters. But as for why Indiana won this game, it's because they played clean football. And I don't think they won the line of scrimmage. I really don't. I mean, Miami's front 7 played a heck of a game. Fernando Mendoza was under a lot of pressure in that first half, but he made plays. The wide receivers made plays. The running backs made plays when they needed to. And they took advantage of special teams. That's the other point in this game. I mean, Miami left 10 points on the board. I think those are those hidden points, right? If you have a cleaner operation back deep in your end zone and Mikhail Kamara isn't able to get to the punter and block that, and Isaiah Jones can't pick it up, that's a 7-point swing. And then the 50-yard field goal at the half that the kicker doinked, that's a 3-point swing. You go back to it, and Miami had a very, very good chance to win this game, and I don't want to say they shot themselves in the foot, but they made way more mistakes than Indiana did.
Absolutely. And honestly, I forgot about the missed field goal. The block punt is kind of what, takes the cake there from a special teams perspective. A great game for people to watch if you are trying to show someone that special teams matters for
Absolutely.
sure. And so, as far as winning the trenches and sort of winning the game in that facet, Mendoza's punched in the mouth again. He's punched in the mouth multiple times, almost literally with the blood on his face and everything like that. Ohio State played well in that way across the board, but it was really just the one hit at the beginning that I felt like was, this is Mendoza really getting knocked back. And Miami, it was just time and time and time again, and still able to respond, able to adjust, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing that big of a front seven and that talented of a front seven, it's going to be a physical game. I mean, I remember Pat Coogan said after the game, it was like, that was the most difficult defensive line he's ever played against. But that's like smash mouth football. That's what he lives for. I mean, he's a center. He knows how to be physical. He's a huge dude, and he's a hell of a player. But you talk about sort of that physicality, and Mendoza's used to that. Like, he's taken shots, he's taken huge hits, like you mentioned, the first play of the Ohio State game, went off for a play, got right back on. I don't think he could probably breathe for 45 seconds to a minute after he took that shot from Caden Curry in Indianapolis. This was probably nothing to him. He was ready to go, and I think that is a big mental thing for the team to see their leader and their quarterback step up and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. I don't care that I'm getting hit here. And should that first hit have been targeting? Absolutely. But it didn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that not mattering is obviously a lot to do with Indiana ultimately winning. What stuck out to me when I was watching live, I haven't watched the game back and watched it a second time. It's kind of one of those where I want to just the feeling to
You want to savor it for a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and because, I don't have any productive reason to watch it back, or, that's just going to be something I enjoy about a month from now. But what stuck out to me in the moment, where even when Indiana was punting, even when, there's a 3-and-out here or whatever it is, and that Miami front seven is playing very well, and Mendoza's sacked or whatever else, what stuck out to me is every once in a while that Kalen Black 7-yard run. And ultimately Indiana outrushed Miami 131 to 110. And even if it didn't amount to anything, even if it was still on a drive where Indiana was going to punt, I never fully felt like Miami was in control, because Indiana constantly had that 7-yard Kalen Black run or whatever it was.
Right, and that is how teams will wear you down and just keep chipping away at you. It's that old philosophy of death by 1,000 cuts. Miami had that huge run by Mark Fletcher. I mean, listen, he is such an explosive player. He is one of the best running backs in the country. He might be the best running back in the country next year once Jeremiah Love is off to the NFL. There's no doubt about that. Malachi Toney is an explosive player. But it is, if you have enough of those explosive plays, yeah, you're going to win some games. But like you said, it's those chunk plays and those, just cut you down a little bit, one chop at a time, 7 to 8 yard runs that really kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that honestly was the one thing about Miami, is they had those explosive plays with those two players. Kind of something that's come up a few times with Indiana. At the beginning of the year, there was that story that maybe was a little bit overblown, where Cignetti in a press conference basically said, against Illinois, we had 5 or 6 complete, I think the word he used was egregious, secondary miscues, and Illinois just didn't punish them. And so that was something that freaked me out. And the type of fan, the type of sports viewer I am is, I'm paranoid, I always was like, I don't think the Pacers are going to make it past this one, or, surely IU doesn't get past this one. And so when the Oregon game comes up, I'm thinking about those 5 to 6 egregious, basically touchdown plays that Illinois was able to grab one, and then obviously it ended up being fine against Oregon for the most part. Kind of comes up again. Obviously comes up against literally the very best you can have, and Toney and Fletcher, as you mentioned. But that was the one thing for Indiana, those explosive plays, and that was the one thing on that last Carson Beck drive where I was, we might not even play. We might play perfect. Everything might be fine, except there might be one misstep, and then that was what was freaking me out as kind of the paranoid fan, which is definitely exacerbated just because I had emotional investment. I'm sure I wouldn't feel that way if I was just watching, but yeah, definitely.
It's hard. It's hard to just watch a game like that, though. And I want to go back to what you were saying about the Oregon game. Yeah, there was a couple of plays, but even when I was at the Peach Bowl, the secondary, I feel, did not have their best game. But Dante Moore was just so uncomfortable in Atlanta, and that front seven was just demolishing him. I mean, they just had Oregon's offense in a blender. There were a couple of open guys on some broken plays downfield that Moore didn't even have time to get to because he was flushed out of the pocket, or he was already on the ground, or he just had to get rid of the ball. It was one of those things that I'm like, you think it's not sustainable, but if the front seven's that good, it kind of is.
Yeah, and actually on the first play, I don't know if you've seen this. I saw this on I need to get off this app, but a random Instagram reel. And it I sat up in my bed. I was like, oh my goodness, because it was the first play, that pick six, kind of corner out on the other side of the field, wide open. And I thought, had people seen this? It was just a fan video of it. And yeah, exactly what you're saying, where it's just it's that complementary football aspect where the front seven, is able to kind of defend the pass in many ways in that way. So Indiana ultimately wins this one. There's no explosive play on the final drive. I suppose there is, but it's one that falls in favor of the Hoosiers. And so now we stand where Indiana actually did it, right? 16-0 champions. Curt Cignetti wins, and I was kind of concerned about that last season when he lost the two big games, where I was like,
right,
Curt Cignetti wins, Google him, but until you get to Ohio State, and then obviously each and every time, the Penn State game, the Ohio State game, Oregon, Iowa, and now throughout the playoff, Curt Cignetti still wins. So 16-0. Obviously a big deal for IU retrospectively. You look at the history, you look at all of that. That's something that I don't know a lot about and has been just completely – everyone else has talked about it, you know what I mean? Like
right.
there are better people than me and probably even you to talk about the history retrospectively. But as far as the future goes, what this means for IU, I think there's a lot that was kind of rightfully brushed under the rug because they were in the middle of a playoff run with the transfer portal and everything else, and how this kind of is lining up for Cignetti to be the next Saban, Indiana to be the next Alabama. That's obviously a lofty claim to make, but I don't think it's an unrealistic one. And in the future, IU looks to be in a great position.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to go back to one thing that I noticed. You were talking about how you just you come across those Instagram reels. For me, it's kind of the same way with Twitter. When I go into that deep dive on just watching analytical content or whatever, there was one thing that I noticed, and I gotta rewatch it to make sure it actually, that was actually the plan. But I think Miami, I saw somebody was watching one of Indiana's punts. I forget what quarter it was, but there was one that McCarthy downed within the 5 in the near side corner. I think Miami had a guy on the top side of the field, and I think that was going to be a trick play, maybe a lateral to the top of the field. There was nobody up there. But McCarthy had such a good punt, and there was such good coverage that you had to fair catch inside the 5. So it's those explosive chunk plays that kind of get taken off the board in those hidden ways that made the difference. But as we look forward, like you said, I'm very hesitant to throw around the term dynasty, because for a dynasty to happen, there's so many things that have to go right. But the groundwork's absolutely there, right? As long as, the staff can stay together as long as possible. I know Derek Owings, the strength coach, went and took the strength coach job at Tennessee. So Coach Cignetti will have to find a replacement. And that's a really underrated position. I mean, you kind of look back at a lot of the struggles with Indiana men's basketball in the last couple of years, I think can be sometimes attributed to Cliff Marshall, who was the strength and conditioning coach for Indiana men's basketball. A lot of injuries, a lot of guys just didn't look like they were really ready to play. This year it's a little different, but basketball is another can of worms that we won't open because it's not fun to. With the term of dynasty, I throw it around very selectively. But there is no doubt in my mind that Indiana should be, as long as Curt Cignetti is coach, and as long as this staff is here, and as long as the financial commitment from the donors and from the executives of the school and from the athletic director, Scott Dolson, is there, there's no reason in my mind to think that Indiana is not going to be a college football powerhouse for as long as Curt Cignetti and the rest of those folks are here. I'll tell you why. Because Curt Cignetti is so involved in the personnel department. He signs off on every person that comes through that program, right? And that is why this program is so organizationally developed and so organizationally strong. Because if there's one person making all of those decisions, and he's really good at it, which Cignetti is, then there's not going to be any discrepancies anywhere on the type of people Cignetti wants in his program as players, as coaches, as support staff.
Yeah, and the part of that with Cignetti is that it's kind of all been, and it was proven before, but it's all been even more so proven now. You look at the fast, physical, relentless idea. You look at all the kind of bold claims and the strong one-liners, and it all kind of feels like talk for probably a lot of people around the country. one of my favorite college football personalities is Josh Pate, and he goes to a game every week, and he never came to Bloomington this season, and I was just waiting for it because I was waiting for, if that was ever going to line up and he was ever going to have some fan event or whatever, and it never happened. And I think that's a good example of the people that are outside of the Bloomington bubble. It kind of all feels like hot air, and now 16-0, national champions, and so even more so than before. You obviously have the transfer aspect. You have the respect aspect with Cignetti and the whole program. And so it's almost as if I feel this way about college sports a great deal, where just the perception of a school impacts the actual success of a school when you look at recruiting and that sort of thing. And so I think about how I feel about IU, or I think about how people that I talk to that don't go to the school think about IU, and I realize that I am the same age as, the kids being recruited and that sort of thing. And it's a similar mindset. It's a similar generation. It's a similar perception. We all watch the same social media. It's all the same. And other people are going to have the same perceptions of Cignetti and IU and all of that. And so obviously they have their quarterback and they have plenty more players coming in, and it's a destination now. IU is a destination.
Right. And you mentioned that. That is exactly what I was going to say next, Andrew. You talk about, people say now that, okay, yeah, you have to just build through NIL. Recruiting doesn't matter as much anymore, but it does. I think you can still grow very solid prospects. Now, is it hard to keep them in your program without significant financial commitment? Absolutely. But it's not impossible. And with the financial commitment that Indiana has, everybody looks at Mark Cuban. There are people richer than Mark Cuban who are donating to this program. I know that sounds crazy to say, but that is true. He's the most front-facing one. He is, the most well-known one. But this program is not going to be short in the piggy bank for a very long time. Maybe ever, just because of these last 2 years. So I think, isn't that weird to think about, though, how we are the same age as these players that we talk about and cover. As growing up, we're kids. We view athletes and even professional athletes as these deity figures that we watch on TV and that are older than us and wiser than us and more experienced. We're the same age as them now, which is just weird to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about this with Maya Makalewski on the women's basketball team a lot.
Yep.
Because, I broadcast that team for WIUX. You're obviously on the men's side. But I remember I posted an Instagram reel of my broadcasting, just, a few broadcast calls trying to promote myself. And something notable in the game was Maya Makalewski exploded from three. And so I just put all my Maya Makalewski triples together. And then as I was posting it, I was like, is this weird? If she sees this, is this going to be strange? Because, we could have a class together. We don't, but we could, and I was just trying to think through it. If this is, because she's obviously, I guess, is that celebrity and kind of public figure, but at the same time, you're exactly right. And it gets weird too when, Cooper Flagg was the one. Well, Ryan Williams was the one for me, but also Cooper Flagg, where, I am, as a freshman, am older than Cooper Flagg.
I'll tell you who the one for me was Connor Bedard of the Chicago Blackhawks. He's 5 days younger than I am.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
And he's an NHL superstar. I'm like, I should just hang it up at this point. I'm cooked. There's no athletic hope for me once these guys are getting to do this thing. And we get older, the pro athletes, they stay the same. That's how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have someone younger than you, when I was in high school, to have someone younger than you in college, it's normal. But then younger than me and now in the NBA with Cooper Flagg is kind of a little bit bonkers. And even for him to grow up watching LeBron. I was watching the Bill Simmons interview with Con Knipple, which was kind of similar, where he kind of is just a guy, that's just really good at basketball. I do highly recommend that to both you and whoever's watching. It was just really insightful to hear from kind of what I would be if I was super athletically gifted, where what's it like to be that person that was watching all these players forever and now LaMelo Ball's at his house, and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, super interesting. But certainly at the college level, also very, very fascinating. I want to sort of switch gears into college football as a whole with the landscape because of this, because I think one misconception that a lot of people have is that because Cignetti did this and because he turned around Indiana in really 1 year, but 2 years to get to the very, very top, because he did it, that's going to start happening all sorts of places. And I obviously could, and this kind of shows that that's possible. But to me, this feels like a one and done thing that in the college football textbooks and the history books in 20 years we're going to look back on. this was the outlier rather than this was the start of a new era where SMU is, blowing out Alabama.
I mean, if there's one team to do it, there's a lot of money over there in SMU. But it is all about people, Andrew, right? And this sort of, firestorm of Cignetti, it makes it possible. I don't want to say it makes it doable, because you have to have this perfect conglomeration of people. And the other thing is that you have to be a little bit lucky too. And I'm not saying Indiana got here because they are lucky, but you think about it. They did not have, Fernando Mendoza did not get hurt this year, right? Elijah Surratt only missed a couple of games, right? Pat Coogan didn't go down with some season-ending injury. And do I believe that the backup center, Austin Leaford, could have done just as good of a job in that system? Probably. But you have to have things go your certain way. And Indiana had a little bit of that luck and a heck of a lot of that skill and the right people, with a little sprinkling, dusting of things just falling their way when they needed to have this happen. So it makes it possible, but it is still so improbable and unlikely, and you have to have that perfect conglomeration of people that Cignetti and Pam Whitten and Scott Dolson have brought into the building to make this happen. And on the other side, you got to bring players as well, because the players are so one-minded and bought in to this system that they are an extension of Curt Cignetti's brain, I almost think. It's like this mothership of football ideas, which is Curt Cignetti, and they just have the right people. So I don't think it's going to happen anywhere else. I think it's near impossible, but to even see it happen once, I think is going to give a lot of programs a lot of help, or a lot of hope rather, but it's also going to make holding on to a head coaching job a heck of a lot harder, because the precedent is now there, even though it's only happened once.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say, is I think that the true impact is going to be a shorter leash for head coaches, and I'm interested to see sort of how that plays out over the course of the next few years, and if we do see some quick firings. I guess it's already happening with James Franklin and a few others.
Right. But even then, James Franklin, he got fired because he couldn't win the big game. But he was there for 10-plus years, and he was never really able to win that big game. So I think that is something where Penn State decided we need a change of scenery. I understand that one. I brought up Jonathan Smith, probably not a great example because he just kind of stunk. But it's also true that Michigan State probably didn't have the most NIL funding or resources there. They do now, because I think a donor just donated $100 or $200 million to Michigan State's athletic fund and improving stuff. But they got their hire. I think they're gonna be a team that maybe surprises some people next year, even though they probably lost a lot of people. But it is absolutely gonna make that leash a little bit shorter, like you said. Not to a crazy extent. People aren't going to get fired consistently across the board after 2 years if they don't go and win a national championship, because at most places it's just not possible. Like if you look at your run-of-the-mill ACC school at, say, I'll pull one out of a hat here. Let's go with Virginia Tech. It's probably not possible there. It might be. You never know. They've been good at football in the past, but it is just so unlikely.
Yeah, and I think that you saying it's possible but not necessarily doable is a great way to put it, especially because at the end of the day, there kind of might just be one Curt Cignetti in the entire world. Certainly haven't seen anything like him to this point.
Exactly.
Before we get out of here,
he's a total anomaly in the best way possible.
Yeah, I love him. I've never watched him. I've never watched him speak or exist in front of a camera, and I've never had any neutral emotions. Even it's only ever been positive. Before we get out of here, I want to ask: you went to the Peach Bowl. I'm sure that was awesome. I've never been to a bowl game. Most of the people watching, probably all the people watching, have never been to a bowl game. And so I just, if you have any stories, any travel stories, I'll kind of let you have the floor on Atlanta, the game, anything you really want to talk about from the Peach Bowl. I'd really be interested to hear.
Well, yeah, that was my first time in Atlanta outside of the airport. And I think, based on just kind of compiling stories because that was the only one of these CFP games that I went to, I have kind of learned that was the best hospitality. The Peach Bowl knocked it out of the park, and I hope I get to go back and be in Atlanta and go cover that event again, because the way everything was just so great. I mean, it was amazing. The hotel we were in, the media hotel, was, I think, like the fourth tallest hotel building in like the Western Hemisphere or something. 70 floors. It was insane. I was staying on the 50th. It was awesome. And, it's just a fun time. Like, they had the media hospitality room, which was just great. Media shuttle, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium is a beautiful piece of architecture. I mean, it is the designers of that place did so well in creating that. It doesn't feel modern. It is very modern in every way, but it doesn't feel modern. It feels like old school. It's so loud, and it's a beautiful stadium. So I really enjoyed my time in Atlanta. I hope I get to go back. As for stories, I can't really, put one on top of my head. There was, we were just kind of watching pregame warm-ups on the sideline, and I found myself standing 2 feet away from Mark Cuban and Scott Van Pelt, so that was pretty cool. I walked behind the game day desk while they were doing their pregame show. My dad took a grainy photo of me on TV, so that was fun. That was fun for him, more fun for him than it was for me, because he was like, "Hey, all right, you got to walk by now." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it just to humor you," but obviously can't say no to that. That's a fun photo for him to have. But just those bowl games are special experiences. Travel was super easy. I flew down, which was a lot of fun. I know a lot of people had interesting times flying to and from California and to and from Miami. Ask Ian once about his experience trying to get to Pasadena. I think he had some flight delays, but mine were thankfully not too crazy. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I hope to go back again.
Awesome. Yeah, especially because Memorial Stadium, which we love, is probably on the smaller side. And so to go from that to Atlanta. Yeah.
It's not even on the smaller side. It's very old, and we love it, but it is very old. It's showing its age. That's okay. It'll get renovated in due time.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's certainly difference between that and Mercedes-Benz Stadium must be alarming, especially for the players.
Oh,
either way, before we get out of here, I just want you to be able to say kind of where people can find you, what you're doing in the near future. I'm sure there's men's basketball games, and just kind of where the Andrew Hillsman brands can be found on the internet.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate the little opportunity to plug. My Twitter is just Andrew_Hillsman. Instagram is Andrew.Hillsman. I can't make them the same because some jerk has Andrew_Hillsman on Instagram. I'm trying to figure out who it is, to no avail. But probably some account that nobody uses. Anyway, got a couple of games coming up. I think my next big one is the Oregon men's basketball game here, so that'll be fun. Then I have the Michigan State one in March, and then softball season will kick off, and myself and Nick Rodecap will be the two voices you hear on the radio and on TV throughout the Indiana softball season. So he and I are really excited to get working for the athletic department in that regard and be the voice of that team for the 2026 season.
Nice. Yeah, you're on the level of Austin Render on the baseball side.
Well, I don't know about that. Austin does a good job, but it's a great gig to have, and certainly looking forward to learning a lot through that position.
Great. Well, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you all watching and or listening to this show, depending on whether or not you're on Spotify or YouTube. That's Andrew Hillsman. I'm Andrew Garrison. We appreciate you all tuning in, and we will talk to you again next time. Welcome back to the Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison, and if you are watching the full version or listening to the full version of this show, you just saw Andrew Hillsman come on to talk about Indiana football. It worked very, very well. It was very seamless with this platform that I'm using, and now it was super easy for me to just kind of single box it and talk to you all about Indiana women's basketball. And that's what I want to do probably for the rest of this show. I'm not sure how much more time we're going to have to discuss anything else, but on the front of IU women's basketball, this team played against Ohio State, number 12 Ohio State, last night in Columbus, and Indiana started up 19-4. I'll be honest, I didn't watch that part of the game. It was on Peacock. I don't have Peacock, but I have YouTube TV. And on YouTube TV, the channel NBC Sports Network, you can watch any of those games that are on Peacock live. The issue is Maryland and Iowa, if I'm not mistaken, played on Peacock and therefore on NBC Sports Network right before it. That game went to overtime. And so the overtime on Peacock, Indiana, started on time with Ohio State. On NBC Sports Network, they televised, obviously, the end of overtime, and so I didn't get to actually see the beginning of this game, and there was kind of nothing I could do. I suppose what I could do is just get Peacock, but you know how the streaming services are. There's the money aspect, there's the password aspect. I ahead of time, I thought, I'll just watch an NBC Sports Network. It's totally fine. And a game went to overtime and it ended up not being totally fine. So when I tuned in, there were 3 minutes and 36 seconds left. I don't believe how I remember that in the first quarter, and it was 19-9 at that time in favor of Indiana. I was alarmed. I was a little bit shocked. I was like, wow, this is a very great start for the Hoosiers. And apparently they ended up starting 19-4. And that's great shooting. That's great shot making. But for the most part, just if you're making every single one of your shots on those early possessions, then things are going to go very, very well for your team, especially on the road. I thought that was super impressive from Indiana. Ohio State's not a team that's necessarily known for its defense. They're known more for their offensive success. But still, to go on the road against the number 12 team in the country and score at that level early on meant a lot. But still, there has to be the understanding that, of course, that's not going to be sustained throughout the entire game. You're not going to be shooting over 70% from three or whatever it is at the beginning of the game like that. And so there's going to be a point where that shooting tails off. There's going to be a point where that offense tails off across the board. And that's what happened to Indiana. They ended up losing 81-67. And so the primary takeaway as a result from that is that this team's got to learn how to play for four quarters. And it's not so much that they need to learn how to play for four quarters, as they need to be able to put that on the floor, translate that onto the floor. They lost the third quarter 27-13. If you just took the scoring from the third quarter, it's Ohio State 27, Indiana 13. The fourth quarter, not much better, mostly garbage time. Ohio State just kind of cruises to a victory towards the end of the game there. Indiana had some nice moments, but again, this is Ohio State kind of taking control in the second half, despite Indiana starting up by so much. The energy, the intensity, the impeccable shooting, eventually that's going to tail off. And it's not that Indiana wasn't trying to maintain that lead or trying to even extend the lead. It's that Ohio State settled in at home, and then the turnover aspect comes into play. Because even early on, when Indiana was shooting that well, they were still turning the ball over. And that was kind of in the back of the head of, well, like, okay, this is going to work. This will be fine. This team can still win if they continue to shoot this well. But no basketball team is going to shoot that well for 40 minutes. That's not the expectation. And so from a fundamental perspective, a fundamental basketball perspective, there has to be a point where this team sort of elevates its level of play and elevates its quality of play across the board. Again, from a fundamental perspective, turnovers have a lot to do with that. Occupying and playing well and establishing authority in the front court has a lot to do with that. Obviously, making free throws, rebounding, moving the ball around, playing good defense, all of those things. And it's not that Indiana fell apart in every single one of those categories. The biggest one, though, was turnovers. They lost the turnover battle 26-7. To have over 25 turnovers on the road against the number 12 team in the country is effectively an automatic way to lose. And obviously, Ohio State took care of the basketball. They only had 7. That's a 34-7 difference in points off turnovers. In literally any stat category, you are probably not going to find a disparity that wide, right? Maybe 3-point shots if one team's shooting well and the other team isn't, but 34-7 is an insane disparity in scoring, especially in points off turnovers, and that's what we saw in this game. And obviously Ohio State capitalized off that a great deal. They created a lot of turnovers. They were pressuring Indiana, even in the backcourt, a decent amount in this game. But still, it's just, that's an almost completely unacceptable amount of turnovers, and that, to me, is what led to Indiana losing this game. Once they stopped shooting well and they were still just handing away possessions, Ohio State quickly came back into this game. They quickly tied it up. They quickly took the lead, and before you know it, Indiana is the loser on the road against number 12, Ohio State. Ohio State was also 32-20 victorious in paint points. They played very well in that category, which was, of course, impressive in its own way. But across the board, right, it's primarily the turnovers for Indiana, and it was a very discouraging and disheartening game for the Hoosiers in that fashion. 19-4 was the lead early on. It was that great shooting, and as soon as that tailed off, Ohio State kind of proved that it was still the better team on the floor, certainly the more opportunistic team, and those turnovers, again, are what's plaguing Indiana. And it's painful because this game to me felt very similar to the Iowa game, which was played inside Assembly Hall. I was there in the crowd just as a fan, just enjoying Assembly Hall. It was very loud for that team against Iowa. But Iowa was shooting horribly. I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 1 for 12 on their first field goals, or 1 for 8 from three, something outrageous in the first quarter. Iowa was simply not scoring because they just weren't making their shots, and Indiana, amassed a pretty significant lead. But if you're going to catch a top 15 team, I believe Iowa was number 11 or number 14 at that time. If you're going to catch a team shooting that poorly, frankly, playing that poorly early on in the season, or early on in the game, you have to win. That has to be a game, especially at home, that you go out and win. And for Indiana in this case, if you're going to amass that much of a lead, if you're going to benefit from hot shooting early on, just across the floor, every single one of your players, you kind of got to close out that game and win it. And in both cases, and there were more factors for the loss against Iowa, just certainly the front court and the rebounding was more of a problem there. And obviously, Evzania Sukuguman still kind of coming back from injury, still working her way back into basketball. In this game, it was the turnovers. This team was still certainly disadvantaged in the front court, still certainly disadvantaged on the glass, but they held their own for much of the game. Zanis Okunguman obviously had a lot to do with that. But for the most part, it was the turnovers. 26 turnovers, 34 points off turnovers for Ohio State. It went very, very well for the Buckeyes in that category. And that's Indiana just literally throwing away an opportunity to pull off an upset win and achieve their first win in Big Ten play. I believe they're 0-8 in Big Ten play at this time. They'll go to Purdue on Sunday, which again was a prime opportunity to win. Then Purdue upset Washington, and now anything can happen, and Purdue seems to be a little bit better than maybe we thought coming into the season. And I was talking with someone who also pays a decent amount of attention to this team, and they kind of said, just as an offhand comment, that this team's lucky that, like, Indiana's lucky that they get to play Purdue twice this year, and they obviously play most Big Ten opponents just once. And because Purdue is obviously on the lower half of the Big Ten standings as well, but especially on the road, Purdue could be dangerous. Purdue could be tricky. That's certainly the best opportunity very soon for Indiana to pick up their win. Their first Big Ten win. They play Rutgers and Penn State in the second to last and the last games of the season. I'll be on the call for WIUX for the Rutgers game, we're broadcasting that game from the studio, but here in Bloomington. But even though it's in Piscataway, but regardless, those two games, those two other teams that are sort of at the bottom of the Big Ten right now, Indiana plays those two teams last. So it's very possible, with how difficult this conference is, that Indiana goes a very long time without winning a conference game. Purdue on the road, even on the road, this Sunday is going to be a prime opportunity. I won't be watching that game live. I'll be on the call for Big Ten Plus this Sunday. Indiana takes on Michigan State, and it's at the same time. It's in the afternoon there, so we'll have to watch that Purdue game later, and I'll kind of have to avoid spoilers for that one sort of as the day progresses. But nonetheless, Indiana and Ohio State, this was a game that was very discouraging, very disheartening, and at least it's clear what this team needs to improve on. At least it's clear what this team needs to fix, that being, of course, the turnovers, which, again, have posed problems for Indiana. It's been difficult for them against sort of teams that defend well in the backcourt. It's been difficult for them across the board. Lots of unforced turnovers, even if it's offensive fouls or travel calls or things of that nature. They're not all live ball turnovers, and Ohio State was scoring out the dead ball turnovers too, but especially against good teams and especially on the road, that's just free points and free momentum for the other team, especially in the Big Ten, where they're going to be able to capitalize off of it, right? Marshall and USC, not so much. Indiana turned the ball over an insane amount in those games as well, but those teams were smoking layups, right? There wasn't as much of an ability to be opportunistic and to capitalize off those turnovers and turn those turnovers into points on the other end. But number 12 Ohio State and a top 15 Iowa team, right? Like these are teams that are going to turn those into points, and really any team in the Big Ten across the board is going to be able to turn those turnovers into points. It's exactly what happened for IU against Ohio State. Kind of a simple game, in my opinion. A game of runs. Indiana started shooting super well. Then as that shooting tailed off, Ohio State has, sort of a more reliable and consistent roster offensively and defensively. And, oh, by the way, Indiana handed 26 turnovers to the Buckeyes and allowed 34 points to be scored off of those. Again, Purdue on the road on Sunday inside Mackey Arena at noon. I actually don't remember at the top of my head what channel that game's on. Probably Big Ten Network or Big Ten Plus. I'll be on Big Ten Plus for IU wrestling against Michigan State. But this was a prime upset opportunity, and it was a prime conference win opportunity, and Indiana, unfortunately, was not able to capitalize off of that opportunity, and they remain winless in the Big Ten as a result. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. 2 segments today. We got the IU football segment with Andrew Hillsman. Went about 30 minutes, a little bit more than 30 minutes on that, which was very fun and very interesting. Certainly a compelling conversation. About 10 minutes there on Indiana women's basketball. I want to talk about IU men's basketball. Unfortunately, not going to have time today. Probably will at some point next week. I want to talk about IU wrestling. The Maryland, I'm not too brokenhearted about not talking about wrestling today because the Maryland match was about 5 or 6 days ago. They play Penn State. They wrestle Penn State tonight. They wrestle Michigan State on Sunday. I'll be watching the Penn State match tonight. I'll be broadcasting the Michigan State match on Sunday, and then I'll have plenty to discuss about both of those matches and both of those meets next week at some point. So we'll get to talk about IU wrestling, and then I want to just briefly touch on Texas Tech women's basketball because they lost. I kind of mentioned how they were undefeated, but still number 17 in the country. That was kind of confusing. It caught my eye, and then as soon as I upload that episode, they lose their next 2 games. Was going to talk about that today. Unfortunately, not going to have time, but we'll hopefully get to touch on Texas Tech women's basketball at some point next week as well, especially if they end up losing any more games. Either way, I appreciate you all a great deal for tuning in. I appreciate Andrew Hillsman for coming on the show a little bit earlier on as well. My name is Andrew Garrison. Again, I appreciate you all tuning in. You're watching or listening to The Andrew Garrison Show, and I will talk to you again next time.